Have you ever wondered what happens when a fool dismantles a jet engine at 30,000 feet? Just because he hates its color, I designed that jet, and I calmly sipped bourbon watching it crash. Welcome to the story of how an arrogant brat and a stupid meme vaporized $1 billion in mere seconds. If you carry a system in the dark, but get treated like garbage, pull up a chair. Let me show you your true worth. Before we dive into the belly of this beast, I want to say a truly heartfelt thank you to everyone tuning in to Boss Revenge Stories today. YouTube recently demonetized our channel, which has completely stripped away our operational budget. If you find value or entertainment in our stories, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hard-working creative team to cover their basic life expenses and keep crafting these videos for you. You can donate right now by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link located in the description and pinned comment below. Thank you so much for standing by us, and now let us get back to the story. My name is Mila Coleman. I am 38 years old, and until recently, I was the chief algorithmic architect at Horizon Apex, a massive energy trading floor based in the heart of Chicago. If you pictures a trading floor, you probably imagine a bunch of loud men screaming into phones and throwing paper in the air. That is an outdated illusion. The real power lives in the server racks, and I was the one who built the beast that ran them. I am a pragmatic, cynical woman who relies on an unhealthy amount of caffeine to get through the day. But I knew exactly what I was worth because I held the lifeblood of the entire Midwestern power grid and natural gas pipeline network in my hands. The trading system I built for Horizon Apex was a beautiful, terrifying monster. It processed millions of electricity and gas contracts every single second. It inhaled oceans of live market data, consumer demand spikes, weather patterns, and pipeline pressures, instantly crunching them to keep the company in a state of flawless risk equilibrium. If a heat wave hit Ohio, my code bought power ahead of time. If a storm knocked out a wind farm in Iowa, my algorithms moved billions of dollars in seconds to cover the gap. We made hundreds of millions of dollars because my system never slept, never panicked, and never made a mistake. For almost a decade, everything ran like a finely tuned Swiss watch. My old boss, Marcus, was a self-made man who started from the absolute bottom. He treated the trading system with a level of respect that bordered on religious worship. He knew that in high-frequency energy trading, you do not mess with the engine while it is running. But 6 months ago, Marcus suffered a massive stroke that forced him into sudden retirement. And that was when the circus came to town in the form of Julian. Julian was 28 years old, the pampered son of one of our biggest institutional shareholders. He walked onto our high-stress trading floor, wearing $1,000 designer sneakers, tailored suits with no socks, and a smile that belonged on a billboard for corporate entitlement. He did not talk like a trader or an engineer. Instead, he spoke entirely in hollow, buzzword-heavy sentences that felt like they were pulled directly from a toxic LinkedIn influencer post. To Julian, systemic risk and safety boundaries were not crucial mathematical guardrails. He openly mocked them, calling them nothing more than the cautious psychological hurdles of an older, obsolete generation that just did not understand disruptive innovation. Within weeks, Julian infected the entire corporate structure with a deeply toxic culture. He forced brilliant, overworked software engineers to show up for mandatory spiritual energy alignment sessions at 7 o'clock in the morning. He would stand at the front of the room, talking about synergy and unlocking personal peak performance, while the people who actually kept the lights on sat there sleep-deprived and miserable. Whenever my team warned him that our data bandwidth was hitting dangerous limits due to his reckless new trading strategies, he would wave his hand dismissively and say, "We lacked a growth mindset." I chose to say absolutely nothing. I just watched, drank my black coffee, and quietly performed my sacred ritual every single morning at exactly 5 o'clock. Because of the massive financial leverage Horizon Apex used to trade millions of megawatts of power every day, the system required a manual override. Every morning before the markets opened, I had to physically sit at my desk, review the overnight volatility. and personally input a unique risk validation code. This code was the master key. It authorized the system to deploy billions of dollars in borrowed capital for the day's trades. Without my daily authentication, the system would refuse to take on any financial leverage to protect itself from a catastrophic market crash. I was the absolute final firewall standing between Horizon Apex and total irreversible bankruptcy, but Julian was too blind to ever notice. It was a Tuesday morning and the natural gas markets were tearing themselves apart. A sudden cold snap across the Northeast had sent heating demands surging, and our servers were screaming under the pressure. I was 3 coffees deep by 9 o'clock in the morning, manually rerouting data flows to prevent our bandwidth from choking on the sheer volume of trades. The air in the server control room was thick with tension. Every single engineer was locked onto their monitors, sweating through their shirts, making sure the physical infrastructure did not buckle under the weight of billions of dollars moving back and forth across the continent. Right in the middle of this high-stakes digital triage, a notification chimed across the entire company communication platform. It was a mandatory all-staff broadcast. I dragged my eyes away from a critical latency warning to look at my secondary screen, expecting an emergency market update. Instead, it was a meme. Julian had sent a heavily filtered neon-tinted image of a falcon violently tearing apart a dove in midair. Plastered across the blood-soaked feathers in bold, glaring letters was a caption that read, "Become the apex predator or become someone else's breakfast. #grindset. #alpha." I stared at the screen. We were literally fighting to keep the regional energy grid pricing from collapsing, and the chief executive officer of the company was treating the enterprise like a high school locker room. The absolute sheer stupidity of it broke whatever professional filter I had left. My fingers hit the keyboard before I could stop myself. In the general chat visible to all 300 employees, I typed a single ice-cold reply. "Falcons usually die young in captivity. We are a national power transit station, not a circus." I hit enter. I closed the chat. I went back to stabilizing the routing protocols. Exactly 15 minutes later, my desk phone rang. It was Human Resources. The walk to the Human Resources department felt like a stroll through a sterile, fluorescent purgatory. When I pushed open the frosted glass door of the conference room, I found Bethany waiting for me. Bethany was the head of Human Resources, a woman whose entire personality consisted of a manufactured, perfectly white, industrial-grade smile that never quite reached her dead eyes. Sitting right next to her, slouched in a leather chair with his ankles crossed on the mahogany table, was Julian. He was wearing those ridiculous $1,000 sneakers and a smirk that made my blood pressure spike. Bethany clasped her hands together tightly and leaned forward, adopting a tone of exaggerated artificial empathy. "Mila, please have a seat. We need to have a very transparent conversation about corporate synergy and team alignment." I remained standing. "Cut the corporate poetry, Bethany. What do you want?" Julian let out a loud theatrical sigh, dropping his feet from the table. "This right here, Mila. This exact defensive posture. I am trying to build a family of aggressive, hungry disruptors here at Horizon Apex. I am trying to cultivate a mindset of relentless financial dominance. But your comment today in the Global Channel, it was highly toxic. You are actively killing the positive energy of the collective. You simply do not fit our new disruptive mindset anymore. We are letting you go effective immediately." I felt a strange, cold wave of absolute clarity wash over me. I was not angry. I was not shocked. I was simply observing a train wreck in slow motion. Before I could even formulate a response to the sheer absurdity of being fired over a bird picture, the office door swung open. In walked a kid who looked barely old enough to buy a beer legally. He had a messy perm, an oversized vintage band t-shirt, and was carrying a tablet covered in brightly colored cryptocurrency stickers. Julian stood up, his chest puffed out with unearned pride. "Mila, to ensure a seamless transition of your duties, I want to introduce you to your replacement. This is Dax. He is 23 years old and a certified AI prompt guru." Dax offered a lazy two-finger salute. Hey, honestly, I have been looking at your architecture logs. All that hard-coded C++ stuff, total legacy boomer tech, it is way too rigid. I am just going to hook the trading execution protocols directly into an open-source large language model. We can use ChatGPT to dynamically manage the national grid risks based on Twitter sentiment analysis. It will be totally autonomous. Zero friction. I stared at the 23-year-old child who honestly believed he could govern the physical realities of high-voltage electricity and multi-billion-dollar margin calls with conversational text prompts. It was so profoundly stupid that it transcended anger and landed straight into high comedy. They were handing the keys of a nuclear reactor to a toddler who thought he could run it with a video game controller. Bethany and Julian were watching me closely. They expected tears. They expected me to scream, to beg for my job, to threaten a massive wrongful termination lawsuit. That is what people do when they lose a highly lucrative career. But I did none of those things. The complete absence of panic or rage in my demeanor seemed to deeply unsettle them. Bethany's fake smile wavered, cracking at the edges. Julian shifted uncomfortably, suddenly looking like a little boy playing dress-up in his father's office. The silence stretched out thick and suffocating as I looked back and forth between the three of them. I did not argue a single word. I did not warn them about the strict margin limits. I did not mention the manual overrides that kept the company alive. I simply reached up, unclipped my employee security badge, and placed it gently on the exact center of the mahogany table. I offered them a faint, chilling smile. "Good luck with the circus," I said softly. Then I turned on my heel and walked out the door. Two towering security guards in cheap black suits escorted me back to my workstation. This is standard operating procedure when you are abruptly terminated from a high-stakes financial institution. You are handed a flimsy cardboard box, and they stand over your shoulders, watching your every hand movement to ensure you do not steal any proprietary algorithmic code or client data. The entire trading floor had gone dead silent. Dozens of engineers and analysts were pretending to look at their screens, but I could feel their eyes burning into my back. Dax, the newly crowned 23-year-old artificial intelligence guru, was hovering just a few feet away. He was practically vibrating with an unearned, arrogant energy, leaning against a pillar with his arms crossed, watching me pack my life into a box. I moved methodically. I placed my mechanical keyboard, my ergonomic mouse, and my favorite chipped ceramic coffee mug into the cardboard. Then very casually, without breaking my rhythm, I reached around to the chaotic tangle of wires at the back of my primary server tower. My fingers brushed against a bulky, scratched piece of black plastic plugged tightly into a hidden serial port. It looked like a cheap, forgotten promotional thumb drive from the early 2000s, the kind of junk you get for free at a tech conference. I pulled it free and tossed it directly into my box. Dax actually let out a short, mocking laugh, shaking his messy hair. "Taking the electronic garbage with you? Good call. I am ordering brand new top-of-the-line hardware for the whole execution team anyway. We do not need any of your analog junk cluttering up my new optimized workspace." I just offered him a polite, hollow smile, keeping my hands perfectly steady. "Waste not, want not," I replied, zipping up my leather tote bag. He had absolutely no idea what he had just allowed me to walk away with. He was too busy dreaming about language models to understand the physical architecture of the room he was standing in. Years ago, my old boss Marcus and I had a long, sobering conversation over an expensive bottle of scotch. Marcus understood the brutal, unforgiving reality of the corporate financial world better than anyone. He knew that the golden age of Horizon Apex would not last forever. He knew that eventually he would either retire or die, and the person replacing him might very well be a silver spoon idiot who cared more about short-term profit margins than structural safety. Marcus had spent his life building this company, and he refused to let a reckless successor burn it to the ground. So together in the dead of night, we built a fail-safe. We called it the Ghost Protocol. Let me be absolutely crystal clear about this. The Ghost Protocol was not a malicious computer virus. It was not a logic bomb. It was not a backdoor Trojan, and it was certainly not an act of illegal corporate sabotage. Deploying malware into a critical national infrastructure system is a severe federal crime, and I had zero intention of spending the rest of my life in a maximum security prison for a fool like Julian. No, the Ghost Protocol was a fully legally compliant, regulatory-approved systemic self-defense mechanism. It was documented on page 412 of the official Enterprise Risk Management Manual, a book that Julian had clearly never bothered to open. It was buried incredibly deep within the core architecture of the main trading engine, so thoroughly integrated into the basic math of the platform that removing it would require rewriting millions of lines of complex code from absolute scratch. The logic behind the protocol was brutally elegant. In the chaotic world of high-frequency energy trading, security and verification are everything. If our central network was ever breached by foreign state-sponsored hackers, or if a physical disaster struck our Chicago headquarters, or if the chief risk manager was kidnapped or suddenly died, the system needed a guaranteed way to protect the massive financial leverage it was managing. That ugly little piece of scratched plastic I had just tossed into my box was actually a custom-built, heavily encrypted hardware security module, a physical dongle key. The entire automated trading engine was strictly programmed to ping that specific physical key, constantly looking for a highly complex, rolling cryptographic hash. If the system did not receive that exact undeniable verification ping for exactly 48 hours, it would automatically assume a catastrophic worst-case scenario. It would conclude that the corporate entity was severely compromised or that the sole person authorized to manage the catastrophic risk was no longer at the helm. Once that 48-hour timer officially ran out, the system would immediately execute a devastating, unalterable defensive maneuver. It would instantly sever all digital connections to our external credit facilities and completely shut down every single automated leveraged trading algorithm. You have to understand how energy trading works. Horizon Apex traded millions of megawatts of electricity and natural gas every single day, but they did it using heavily borrowed money. It is like buying a $10 million mansion, but only putting down $10 of your own cash. That is leverage. But without the Ghost Protocol receiving its digital heartbeat signal from my dongle, the system would instantly demand 100% physical cash collateral for every single active trade currently on the books. It would completely lock down the trading network and flat out refuse to execute a single new transaction unless the company could mathematically prove it had the raw liquid cash sitting in a secure escrow account to cover the entire position. We are talking about demanding billions of dollars in hard, undeniable currency. Money that Julian and his arrogant board of directors absolutely did not have sitting around in a checking account. The security guards escorted me through the sprawling marble-floored lobby and pushed me out through the heavy revolving glass doors. I stepped out onto the busy Chicago pavement. The frigid wind coming off Lake Michigan hit my face, but I had never felt warmer or more at peace. I stood there on the concrete clutching my cardboard box and took a deep, deliberate breath of the sharp city air. I casually glanced down at my wristwatch. It was exactly 10 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday. Deep inside the freezing server vaults of Horizon Apex, a silent, invisible digital clock had just started ticking. The 48-hour countdown was officially live. I did not go back to my apartment to frantically update my resume. I did not call a labor attorney to cry about unfair dismissal. Instead, I hailed a yellow taxi, slid into the back seat, and gave the driver the address for Wrigley Field. The iconic stadium was hosting an early afternoon baseball game. I walked right up to the box office and bought a premium ticket just behind the third base dugout. I ordered a massive ice-cold draft beer and a hot dog loaded with spicy mustard. I settled into my plastic green seat, listened to the sharp crack of the wooden bat, and watched the players run the bases under the bright, clear midday sun. The crowd roared around me, blissfully unaware of the financial earthquake brewing just a few miles away. As the home team hit a spectacular double into the outfield, I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and held down the power button until the screen went completely black. Friday arrived, bringing with it a record-breaking heat wave that draped itself heavily over the entire American Midwest. The morning sun was a brutal, unyielding force pushing the temperature past 95 degrees before most people had even finished their morning commute. I was spending my morning standing on the shaded balcony of my apartment, dressed in comfortable linen, casually pruning my collection of potted orchids. I had a tall glass of iced lemon water resting on the railing. The city of Chicago was sweltering below me, a concrete oven baking in the summer haze, but my mind was cooler than a mountain stream. I knew exactly what was happening downtown. In the high-stakes world of energy trading, extreme weather is the ultimate catalyst for unimaginable profit or total ruin. Millions of residential air conditioning units, commercial refrigeration systems, and industrial cooling fans across Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio were kicking on all at once. The regional power grid was beginning to groan under the sheer massive weight of the surging electricity demand. Utility providers were growing desperate, scrambling to purchase emergency wholesale power to prevent rolling blackouts from sweeping across the residential suburbs. The market volatility was absolutely spectacular. It was precisely the kind of chaotic, high-demand scenario that Horizon Apex was perfectly engineered to exploit. Under normal circumstances, the trading floor should have been a symphony of calculated aggression, executing millions of microtransactions and capturing hundreds of millions of dollars in profit. But today was not a normal circumstance. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, the invisible 48-hour timer finally reached zero. Deep within the heavily air-conditioned server vaults of the Horizon Apex building, the Ghost Protocol completed its final security sweep. It reached out, searching the physical hardware ports for the rolling cryptographic hash from my little plastic dongle. It found absolutely nothing. Operating precisely as designed, the protocol initiated its defensive lockdown sequence. Up on the trading floor, the transition from high-octane financial warfare to absolute paralyzing terror happened in a fraction of a second. Across the massive open-plan room, hundreds of high-resolution monitors simultaneously flickered, stuttered, and instantly shifted to a uniform, lifeless shade of gray. The relentless pulsating streams of green and red market data simply vanished. Every single broker, analyst, and quantitative trader who had been furiously hammering away at their mechanical keyboards suddenly found themselves staring at dead screens. When the senior brokers frantically tried to force their buy and sell orders through the network, a glaring, unapologetic notification box violently stamped itself across the center of their displays. The message was cold, precise, and entirely uncompromising. It read, "Cash margin required, $2.4 billion, leveraged trading suspended." In an instant, the company lost absolutely all of its financial liquidity right in the middle of a screaming bull market. Horizon Apex had thousands of open delivery contracts that they were legally bound to fulfill, but without the automated system providing the leveraged buying power, they could not actually purchase the underlying megawatts of electricity to deliver to their municipal clients. The default clauses embedded in those high-stakes energy contracts are brutally unforgiving. For every single hour that Horizon Apex failed to deliver the promised electricity to the national grid, they immediately began incurring massive automatic breach of contract penalties. The company was bleeding cash at an agonizing rate of $20 million every single hour. The financial hemorrhage was staggering, and there was no tourniquet in sight. Absolute, unadulterated panic erupted. The once disciplined trading floor devolved into a scene of pure madness. Senior traders were screaming obscenities into their headsets, slamming their fists against their mahogany desks, and physically throwing their expensive mobile phones against the reinforced glass windows. Julian burst out of his luxurious corner office, his face entirely drained of color. His perfectly tailored suit suddenly looked wrinkled, and his $1,000 designer sneakers squeaked awkwardly against the hardwood floor as he sprinted across the room. He aggressively shoved panicked employees out of his way until he reached the engineering pod. He stood over Dax, waving his arms frantically, screaming at the top of his lungs, his voice cracking as he demanded that the 23-year-old artificial intelligence expert instantly fix the glitch and turn the money printer back on. All of his hollow LinkedIn buzzwords about synergy, disruptive mindsets, and positive energy had completely evaporated, replaced by the raw, pathetic terror of a boy who had just broken his father's most expensive toy. Dax was sweating profusely, wiping his forehead with the sleeve of his vintage band t-shirt. His confident, arrogant smirk was entirely gone. He stared at the cascading error logs on his terminal with wide-eyed, undeniable horror. But Dax, fueled by the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of youth and a profound ignorance of how physical legacy systems operated, made the ultimate fatal mistake. Instead of picking up the phone and calling a senior structural engineer to carefully diagnose the lockout, he decided to fight the machine. He quickly opened up his command terminal, connected to an open-source large language model, and frantically asked the artificial intelligence to generate a brute force script to bypass the security wall. He took that unverified, automatically generated block of code and recklessly smashed it directly into the core firewall of the Ghost protocol. The system did not merely reject his clumsy, amateurish code. It analyzed the unauthorized penetration attempt, measured the aggressive nature of the script, and immediately classified Dax's action as a Level 1 external cyber attack. The consequences were instantaneous and devastating. The Ghost protocol slammed down the final, heaviest iron gate. It completely locked out the entire corporate database, revoked all administrative privileges, and, operating exactly as strict federal safety regulations required, during a suspected critical infrastructure breach, fired off an automated high-priority alarm signal. That signal bypassed local authorities entirely and was sent directly to the headquarters of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in Washington. Within 5 minutes of Dax executing his foolish script, Julian's private executive phone began ringing. It was not an angry investor or a confused client. It was the lead investigative director of the Federal Commission. The federal government does not play games when it comes to the safety and stability of the national power grid. The director calmly and coldly informed Julian that they had just received a distress beacon indicating a catastrophic cybersecurity breach at a major regional energy transit node. The director then issued a devastating, non-negotiable ultimatum. Horizon Apex had exactly 2 hours to provide a comprehensive, deeply technical explanation of the system failure and definitively prove that the national power grid was not compromised. If they failed to deliver that unquestionable proof before the 2-hour deadline expired, the federal government would deploy emergency executive powers. They would immediately freeze every single financial asset the company possessed, seize their servers, and shut down the entire corporation indefinitely pending a massive criminal investigation. The company was no longer just losing money. It was standing directly on the brink of total, irreversible erasure. I had just finished clipping a dead stem off my favorite moth orchid when I decided to power my smartphone back on. The device instantly vibrated so violently it nearly slipped from my hand. I had 73 missed calls, 40 unread text messages, and a flooded voicemail inbox. Just as I was scrolling through the sheer wall of panic, the screen flashed with an incoming call. The caller identification displayed Julian's name. I tapped the green accept button and pressed the phone to my ear. I did not even get the chance to say hello. "I am going to destroy you," Julian was screaming so loudly his voice was distorting the tiny speaker. "You vindictive, psychotic criminal, I have corporate security pulling your logs right now. You planted a logic bomb in our servers. I am dragging you into federal court, Mila. I will personally see to it that you spend the rest of your pathetic life rotting in a federal prison cell." I held the phone a few inches away from my ear, listening to him hyperventilate. He sounded like a cornered animal. When he finally paused to suck in a ragged breath, I spoke with a quiet, completely flat tone. "You fired the safety inspector, Julian. Now the building is burning. I suggest you buy a bucket." I tapped the red button, ending the call. Then, with a few quick swipes, I permanently blocked his number. I took a slow sip of my lemon water and went back to my orchids. Exactly 5 minutes later, the phone buzzed again. This time the screen displayed a restricted, heavily encrypted international number. There were only 3 people on the planet who used that specific secure telecom routing protocol, and 2 of them were currently sailing on massive yachts in the Mediterranean. That left 1. I answered the call. "Good morning, Victor." Victor was the chairman of the board of directors for Horizon Apex. He was a ruthless self-made billionaire who treated corporate acquisitions like blood sports and viewed human beings as disposable assets. He was currently calling me from 30,000 feet in the air, flying across the country in his private jet. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously calm, a stark contrast to Julian's hysterical screeching. "Mila, I am cutting straight to the bone. My company is bleeding cash, and the federal government is breathing down my neck, threatening to freeze every asset I own in less than 2 hours. My chief executive officer tells me you sabotaged our trading platform on your way out the door. He wants to bring in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I told him to hold off until I spoke with you. I am giving you exactly 1 chance to fix this before I ruin your life." I leaned against the railing of my balcony, watching the heat waves ripple off the asphalt down on the street. "Victor, you are a smart man. Do you honestly believe I would risk a federal indictment by planting malicious code? Then explain to me why my screens are dark and my margin accounts are locked down." Victor barked, his composure slipping slightly. "I did not sabotage anything," I replied smoothly. "The system is operating flawlessly. In fact, it is doing exactly what it was programmed to do under Title 18 of the Federal Grid Security Act. I suggest you open the Enterprise Risk Manual to page 412. It outlines the GHOST protocol, a legally mandated, fully compliant failsafe designed to protect the national energy grid from gross incompetence." Silence stretched over the encrypted line for several heavy seconds. I could hear the faint hum of his jet engines in the background. "What gross incompetence?" Victor demanded, his tone dropping an octave. "The kind of incompetence that fires the chief algorithmic architect during a volatile market swing over a picture of a bird," I said. "Your hand-picked chief executive officer Julian terminated me on Tuesday without any transition plan. He then replaced me with a 23-year-old child who just attempted to breach a federally regulated firewall using a randomly generated artificial intelligence script. The system detected an unauthorized cyber intrusion by an unqualified user, and it triggered an automatic defensive lockdown to protect billions of dollars in leveraged assets. Julian did not just remove a gear from the engine, Victor. He ripped out the steering wheel while driving down a mountain. I am the only person who holds the verification clearance to authorize those trades." I heard a sharp intake of breath. The realization hit Victor like a physical blow. He was a ruthless predator, but he was not stupid. He instantly understood the catastrophic magnitude of Julian's arrogance. "That arrogant little fool!" Victor hissed, his voice trembling with a terrifying rage aimed entirely at Julian. "He fired you over a meme." "He called it a lack of positive energy," I stated dryly. "But we do not have time to discuss his management style. You have less than 90 minutes before the Federal Regulatory Commission seizes your entire company. So here are my terms." "Terms," Victor snapped. "You do not dictate terms to me." "I absolutely do," I fired back, my voice hardening into steel. "First, Julian is terminated. Not tomorrow, not after an internal investigation. Right now. I want him escorted out of the building by security immediately. Second, the boy with the artificial intelligence script is thrown out onto the street. Third, you will wire a $5 million consulting fee directly into my primary bank account within the next 60 minutes. And finally, I want a permanent voting seat on the board of directors." Victor let out a harsh, bitter laugh. $5 million and a board seat. "You are out of your mind, Mila. I am not negotiating with a terrorist." "I am not a terrorist, Victor. I am a highly specialized technical consultant offering emergency disaster recovery services. If you do not like my price, You can hang up right now and explain to the federal agents why your company triggered a national grid security alarm. The fines alone will exceed $100 million, and your stock price will hit zero by Monday morning. Your call. The silence this time was agonizingly long. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head as he calculated the brutal mathematics of his situation. He had no leverage. He was completely cornered, and we both knew it. Fine, Victor growled, the words sounding like rough sandpaper. You win. The money will be in your account. Julian is gone. Just give me the damn override password so I can have the engineering team unlock the mainframe. I will have someone type it in right now. I took another sip of my iced water, savoring the absolute total victory of this exact moment. There is no password, Victor, I said gently. What do you mean there is no password? He yelled. The Ghost protocol operates on a physical cryptographic hardware key, a dongle. It cannot be bypassed remotely. It cannot be typed in. The key has to be physically inserted into the primary server rack in the basement of the building. Then where the hell is the key? It is currently sitting in my left hand, Victor, and I am sitting on my balcony drinking lemon water. Get to the office, he roared. I am in my apartment, I replied casually, checking my wristwatch. Traffic is terrible today. It is going to take me at least 45 minutes to drive downtown. I strongly suggest you start getting that wire transfer ready. I will not step foot in that building until the $5 million clears. I hung up the phone before he could scream another word. I stepped off the elevator and onto the main trading floor of Horizon Apex, with exactly 15 minutes left before the federal lockdown took permanent effect. My phone had buzzed in the taxi 5 minutes prior, confirming that a wire transfer of $5 million had successfully settled into my account. The scene inside the firm was nothing short of apocalyptic. Senior traders' men who usually projected absolute invincibility were sitting on the floor with their heads in their hands. Some were openly weeping. Off to the side, completely stripped of his arrogant swagger, Julian was silently packing his expensive desk accessories into a cheap cardboard box. All the blood had drained from his face. He looked like a ghost who had just realized he was dead. I did not even break my stride. I walked straight past him, ignoring his pathetic existence, and headed directly for the primary server room. Victor had managed to take a private helicopter straight from the airport to our rooftop helipad. He and the rest of the senior executive team were standing outside the glass walls of the server vault, sweating profusely in their tailored suits. When Victor saw me, he exhaled sharply and practically threw the heavy glass door open for me. I stepped inside the freezing room and immediately ordered every single one of them to step back. I walked up to the main execution terminal, pulled the scratched plastic dongle from my pocket, and reached around to the back of the tower. That was when the smell hit me. It was the acrid, unmistakable stench of burned ozone and melted copper. I leaned over and looked at the primary connection hub. The port was completely charred. The metal pins were melted together into a useless clump of black plastic. Dax, in his infinite arrogant stupidity, had not just run a bad script. He had physically tried to jump the electrical current to bypass the hardware lock, and in doing so, he had completely fried the only standard input gate. The regular method of authenticating the system was totally destroyed. Victor saw my face change and grabbed his own hair. We had exactly 3 minutes left on the federal clock. I did not have time to panic. I spun around, ripped open a maintenance cabinet, and grabbed a thick bundle of raw fiber optic cables. I looked at the 2 massive security guards standing by the door and pointed to the heavy steel door leading down to the industrial cooling basement. I screamed at them to break the lock. They did not hesitate. One of them kicked the door handle so hard the metal shattered. I sprinted down the concrete stairs into the freezing, deafeningly loud sub-basement. Deep behind the massive water chillers hidden under a floor grate was a secondary physical connection node. It was a raw, direct line to the mainframe that only Marcus and I knew existed, built specifically for a catastrophic physical failure. The building alarms began to shriek, a blaring siren warning us that the federal deadline was imminent. I dropped to my knees on the concrete. I did not have wire strippers, so I used my bare hands and teeth to tear away the protective rubber shielding from the fiber optic lines. My fingers were bleeding, covered in machine oil and dust. I frantically twisted the raw optical threads into the emergency terminal block. With exactly 45 seconds left on the federal countdown, I jammed the dongle into the rigged connection port. I pulled a rugged maintenance keyboard from the rack, balanced it on my knee, and rapidly typed out a 50-character core override command sequence. I slammed the enter key. The entire server room plunged into total darkness for one agonizing second. Then the emergency lights flickered, and every single monitor across the entire building violently exploded into brilliant neon green. The data flow roared back to life like a shattered dam. Millions of delayed orders flooded through the network, instantly matching and executing. The massive cash margin walls dropped instantly. The automated distress beacon communicating with the Federal Commission abruptly switched to a resolved status, canceling the asset freeze with merely seconds to spare. Up in the main vault, Victor let out a gasp of relief so loud it echoed down the concrete stairwell. I slowly stood up, wiping a streak of black machine oil from my hands, using a rag I found on the pipes. I walked back up the stairs and stepped onto the main trading floor. The alarms had stopped. The room was buzzing with the frantic, beautiful sound of money being made again. Julian was standing near the exit, holding his pathetic cardboard box. His expensive suit jacket was draped over a chair nearby. I picked up his jacket, maintained unbroken eye contact with him, and casually dropped his $1,000 garment straight into a half-full trash can. I turned away from him and looked at the board of directors. They were standing in a line, staring at me with a mixture of absolute terror and profound reverence. I snapped my fingers at a junior analyst and told him to fetch me a large iced black espresso. Then I looked directly at Victor and informed him that I would be taking the corner office on the top floor, and I wanted it redecorated by Monday. Let this be a permanent lesson to anyone listening. Never underestimate the quiet, unseen people doing the heavy technical lifting in the background. The men in the expensive suits might stand on the stage and soak up all the applause, but we are the ones who built the stage, and we are the only ones keeping it from collapsing underneath their feet. You can fire us, you can mock us, and you can try to replace us with algorithms. But the moment you cut our power, you will quickly realize that you are the ones who have to live in the dark. Before we wrap up, I want to take a moment to say a very sincere and polite thank you to every single one of you for listening to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's journey and want to help our channel survive its demonetization, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can do this easily by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the pinned comment. That single dollar goes directly toward paying our hardworking staff, helping them feed their families, and ensuring we can keep creating these high-quality revenge stories for you. Thank you again, stay sharp, and I will see you in the next one.